Ever get the urge to just hit the reset button? Like on the whole system?
I see where you're going with this.
Today, we're diving into something pretty radical. We're talking about completely overhauling a political system.
Sounds intense.
It is. We're looking at an episode of Pat at Charles Digital Diaries.
Okay, I'm familiar with their work.
They really get into it with this idea of term limits for members of parliament in the UK.
Yeah, that's a hot topic for sure. The UK system, you can be an MP for your entire career, so they're talking about shaking things up.
Big time. What do they say is the big problem with career politicians?
Well, they say that MPs, over time, they might lose touch
Lose touch? How so?
with the people they represent. They're in that political bubble for so long.
So you get this big disconnect between the people in power and, well, everyone else.
Exactly.
Okay, so their solution is term limits, but how would this even work? Like, how do you actually implement that?
It's actually pretty simple in theory. 2 terms, that's it. You serve 2 terms as an MP, and then you're done.
So that's it. No more running for office after that.
Nope. Time to step aside and let someone with a fresh perspective take over.
I can see how that could shake things up.
It's all about bringing in new ideas, new energy, and hopefully making the system more responsive to what people actually want.
And they brought up an interesting comparison.
Did they talk about Venezuela?
Yeah, they used it as, like, a warning.
Right. Because without term limits, you can have a single party or even a single person holding on to power for decades.
And that can really undermine democracy. Right.
Exactly. It can lead to all sorts of problems. Instability, corruption, you name it.
So term limits are about more than just fresh faces. They're a safeguard.
Exactly. They're about making sure that power doesn't get too concentrated in the hands of a select few.
Makes you wonder if other countries should be looking at this more closely. But it can't all be positive, right? There have to be some downsides to term limits.
Oh, absolutely. One of the big criticisms is the loss of experience. You got these MPs who've been around for years, they've seen it all, they know how the system works, and then boom, they're out.
All that knowledge, gone.
Potentially. And some people worry that it could make politicians more susceptible to lobbying.
How so?
Well, if they know they only have a limited time in office, they might be more likely to cater to special interests to try and line up their next gig after their term is up.
So it's not a perfect solution.
There's no such thing as a perfect solution when it comes to politics, but it's a debate worth having.
It definitely gets you thinking.
It does. It makes you look at your own system, your own country, and ask, how could we do things differently?
And that's what's so great about what Charles and Paula are doing, getting people to think critically about their political systems.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that people are engaged, that they're informed, and that they hold their leaders accountable.
It all comes back to active citizenship.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So what do you think? A generation from now, will we see term limits becoming more common around the world?
It's a question worth pondering.
Ever get that feeling, scrolling through the news, and it's just the same old political stuff, same faces, same arguments over and over again?
Yeah, I go what you mean.
Like, honestly, it makes you want to just shut it all out, you know?
It's like a broken record, right?
Yeah.
And you're not alone.
Definitely not. So that's why we're diving into something kind of different today, something that might just, I don't know, rekindle a bit of hope in all this, or at least get us thinking about politics in a new way.
Okay, I'm listening.
So we're looking at this episode from the podcast name Podcast, and they're asking a question I think more of us should be thinking about. What if, and hear me out on this, what if politics wasn't a career at all?
Now that's a radical thought.
Right? Tell me more. Tell me more.
They're really going for it with this episode. They call it the fall of politics, the need for a new era of public service.
Okay, the fall of politics. I like the sound of that already.
It's a total reimagining of how we see political involvement, like starting from scratch, with who even gets to be a politician in the first place.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Because right now it feels like once you get a foot in the door in Westminster, you're there for good, you know?
Absolutely. That's a big part of what they're trying to challenge.
Like, how can anything really change when it's the same people calling the shots for decades?
It's about who has the power, right?
Yeah.
And how long they hold on to it.
Exactly. This podcast, they actually use the word entrenchment to describe it.
And I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah, entrenchment. Like, they've dug themselves in, and it's this whole detached system, which I guess is what they mean by the fall of politics. Huh?
Yeah, and they're proposing this new era of public service to combat that, to shake things up.
Okay, so how do they actually propose we make that happen? Because it's one thing to say politics should be different, but how do you actually change a whole system?
Well, for one thing, they're suggesting that anyone who wants to be an MP, they have to gain experience at a local council level first.
Interesting. So no jumping straight to the big leagues.
But got to get your hands dirty, prove yourself.
Makes sense. Start by understanding the needs of your community, show you can get things done.
Right, exactly. And just imagine what that could mean, like in the real world.
I'm all ears.
Imagine an MP who's actually spent time on a local council dealing with, say, housing shortages.
Okay, yeah.
They'd be coming to Parliament with first-hand experience, not just some theoretical ideas, right?
Absolutely. Totally different perspective.
And then this idea of local council experience, it kind of ties into their most radical proposal.
Hit me with it.
Term limits for MPs.
Whoa! Like the U.S. president, only 2 terms.
That's the idea.
Now that is radical. But for a member of parliament? Real.
That's what they're proposing. 2 terms, max, and that's it.
Okay, 2 terms. That's a big change. I mean, what's the thinking behind such a short time?
Well, it's about fresh perspectives, fresh ideas, you know?
Keep it moving, keep it fresh.
Exactly. The podcast is saying this 2-term limit, it would prevent these political dynasties from forming. So you wouldn't have, the same families or groups holding power for generations.
Yeah.
Instead, you'd have all these new voices coming in, new experiences, and it would keep the whole system more dynamic.
Makes sense.
And crucially, it would make it more responsive to what people actually need.
Oh, okay. So it's about actually getting stuff done, right?
Exactly. Less time spent on political maneuvering and more time actually serving the people.
Right, because that's the thing, right? It feels like right now so much of being an MP is about just, being an MP.
I see what you mean.
It's all about securing the next election and climbing that ladder.
It's their career.
Exactly. But if you've only got 2 terms, wouldn't that make you think, okay, I've got to make the most of this, actually achieve something concrete?
That's the whole point. And they take it even further. This podcast.
Do tell.
They propose that during those 2 terms, MPs wouldn't be eligible for any leadership positions.
Whoa. Back up. So no prime minister dreams allowed. It's about shifting the focus.
That's pretty radical. It is. It really is. But it kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Go on.
It gets rid of that whole, jockeying for power, that constant competition.
Right.
It reinforces the idea that it's not about you, the politician.
It's about the service.
Yes. It's about using those 2 terms to make a real difference.
Huh. I kind of like it.
It's like jury duty, You serve your time, you contribute, and then you step back and let someone else take over.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
And just like jury duty, this podcast is saying that doing an MP should be seen as this privilege, this honor.
Not the goal itself.
Exactly. You're there to represent, not to rule.
Okay, so someone serves their 2 terms, they've made their mark. What happens then? Do they just disappear from politics altogether?
They're pretty clear about that, too.
Oh, lay it on me.
After those 2 terms, former MPs, they'd have to completely withdraw from any political decision-making.
Wow, so no backdoor deals, no lobbying, no joining think tanks to influence things from the outside.
Nope, clean break.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It really is. But it all ties back into this idea of service, right? You do your part, and then you step back to make space for new voices, new energy.
It's like a changing of the guard, kind of. Okay, so big question. Would this actually work? So it's less House of Cards and more like by the people for the people, right? I'm starting to get it, I think.
It's a really different way of looking at things.
Well, would it actually work? Would we end up with a better democracy,
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Because good intentions are one thing.
Right, they only get you so far.
Exactly. So paint me a picture here.
Okay.
What does a revitalized democracy actually look like in this system?
Well, first off, imagine if people actually trusted politicians again.
Okay, yeah.
Not blindly, obviously, but with this sense that, hey, these are people who are genuinely here to serve.
Instead of serving themselves, right.
Exactly. It's all about limiting the amount of power someone can have.
Right.
And for how long.
Because like they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
It's true. And with this system, you might actually avoid that whole problem.
It's like you're hitting refresh on the whole system.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about trust.
What else?
Think about all the young people who just aren't engaged in politics right now.
Because it feels out of touch.
Exactly. It just feels outdated, like it's not for them.
But with this new way of doing things, it's like a short-term commitment.
Right, like a few years of service, really making a difference.
Like a supercharged version of volunteering or something.
That's a really good way to think about it.
And suddenly it's not this old, dusty system anymore.
Right, it's a chance for them to come in with fresh ideas and actually shake things up a bit.
Politics could actually be cool again. Who would have thought?
Right, and that's what this whole podcast is really trying to get at, I think.
It's not just about, like, tweaking a few rules.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about changing how we see the whole thing, right? Power, leadership, what government is actually for.
It's about a system that actually works for everyone.
So I've got to ask, if this was how it actually worked, if it was about service and not a lifelong career, would you ever run for office?
It's funny you should ask that. It's something I've thought about a lot since listening to that podcast.
Right. It really makes you think.
What if we all saw it as our duty to step up, to contribute what we can, and then make space for the next generation?
That's a really powerful thought. Well, I think that's the perfect place to wrap things up. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It really has.
It's about choices, it's about responsibility, and yeah, maybe even about rediscovering what we can achieve together. Thanks for joining us today. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It's always a pleasure to chat with you.